In DC, for DC. DC Radio, 96.3 HD4 and DCRadio.gov.
Welcome back to another edition of Champagne and Credit right here on DCRadio.gov at 96.3 HD4. And hey, it's another day in the neighborhood. Would you be mine? Won't you be my neighbor? All right, so, okay, I'm not in the vocal, but I am really happy about this time of month when I get an opportunity to spend some time next to one of my sisters, a woman who has really got it going on, who is really passionate about creating a change in the lives of people. And sometimes our views do differ, but at the end, it is all about empowering those who have been left out. And I'm speaking of none other than the fabulous Shahidah Williams, the founder of Shahidah Speaks. And she also wants me to say she's a consumer advocate. She's so many things. She's got her JD. She speaks multiple languages. She's been in the financial sector for over 20 plus years. But at the end of the day, she's just good people. And I'm really excited to, hey, have you back into the space. Welcome back to Champagne and Credit.
Oh, thank you for having me, Muriel. It's so wonderful to be in your presence. You're such a great spokesperson for everything money, and I like being in your air. It's so positive, and, I love learning from you. And each time we get together, there's always something new and robust to discuss. I can't wait to dig into today's discussion.
Yes, no matter how small, we make it pretty big. But, at the end of the day, we got to make sure everybody knows who you're speaking on behalf of.
Oh, of course. These opinions are mine. And, I wear many hats. And this one I wear is, again, consumer advocate. I'll defend that in a minute. But, I have a consultation business where Shahidah Speaks that does personal financial workshops. We do workshops on budgeting and credit and just general wealth management, getting people in the habits, the good habits. It's 2020 now. Got to get you in those habits of motivating you to budget and save your money and to build wealth for a long, long, prosperous life. So, Shahidah Speaks.
Now that we've got that out of the way.
We do.
So the last time you were in the studio, the last two times you were in the studio, we sort of, I think some of the best meat comes at the end of the show or after the show is over. But we had this conversation around the significance of fee-based services, particularly in certain communities. We talked about the power of a check casher actually in their own way empowering people because they know what they're going to get when they walk out, when they walk in and when they walk out, compared to dealing with a financial institution where they may not understand all the rules and regs. We recently had a conversation about free paying for free tax preparation services versus paying a fee. You've got some pretty strong views on that.
Yeah, I find it interesting that, we do-gooders, we advocates, right? We are so prescriptive that we don't take a step back to realize that while a person that we're trying to make recommendations for or be helpful to has their own thoughts and feelings and discernment, they have their own intelligence. And it's not always an irrational choice to choose an upfront fee over uncertainty of, something that may seem to be free on its face. So, we've made the comparison between check cashers and bank accounts. Now, for me, having a traditional bank account seems like a rational choice. I think I can read a banking agreement. I don't know. I have a JD. I've tried to parse one or two in my time, and some of the language is really dense. But I can discern, the fees, the events that are going to happen that trigger those fees, how long a check is supposed to float, when they're cashed, and the rules. Versus someone who may have a more simpler education or a simpler experience with using financial services. They may opt for the check cashing service because up front they pay their fee and they're out the door. They don't have to worry about, am I going to be charged, is there a check outstanding or am I going to be charged all these other fees and I'm not sure how it works. And the uncertainty of that, of course, put you in the check cashing purview, and you pay a premium for that, but you also have the peace of mind of knowing that whatever fee that business charges, net that fee, you're out the door. Now, of course, we argue that, well, look, you could save that fee. That fee is significant. What would you do if you could have that extra fee? And that's not a bad argument. It's just when you talk about consumer choices, they're behavior-driven choices. And we have to acknowledge that it is not an irrational choice to choose certainty, fee-based services, out-the-door services over some of the more traditional but more complex financial services. They're not fit for everyone, and the people who choose them are not, dare I say, stupid.
Powerful close. However, the argument is often made that when you're talking about 15 to 20% of your earnings going for a service that you could get considerably less, that expense in and of itself does impact your quality of life.
It could, but I guess my argument, the crux of it is, if you don't understand how to use that service that would be free, it is not free. Right? I mean, how many people have tried to use bank accounts who didn't have a good financial education, who ended up triggering a bunch of fees and a bunch of bounced checks and a bunch of, mischief, in their finance? I mean, it just explodes all over their balance sheet. It's no more cheaper. It actually might be cheaper if you did that analysis. So we choose between, the bad check casher versus the free of traditional service. Versus, what if I have a bad traditional bank, experience with the check casher? And a lot of people who don't have the education to handle a traditional bank or credit union account end up with a bunch of fees. Is that less or more than what they would pay if they went to a check casher? And then when we measure that, is it just in money, or can we add a premium in for frustration?
So you're saying that those that are in the industry are more looking at behaviors without a clear definition of what X is. So if X is my ability to understand, or what I do or do not understand, then my behavior is going to be Y. But if those that are in the industry look at X as a constant, it does not change regardless of who you are, then the way we're going to evaluate people who use these services is going to be such where you use the word, I'm not stupid. But is that how we are making these people feel?
Quite possibly. I'm using the word we. I guess I should include myself there because I'd like to be part of the solution. But I think we are prescriptive insofar as when someone's poor, we think, okay, here's how we fix it. But consumer behavior is driven by a person's discernment. So we can increase that person's level of discernment. We can increase their capability, their empowerment to make better choices, better being cheaper choices for them and their households. But when in some of these vulnerable communities, you called them precious communities in a prior discussion, in some of these precious communities, cash in the hand is worth so much more than this conceptual opportunity to have something free. You see? And so I know I can pay my bills. I know I can pay my rent. I know I can, pay for juniors' little league fees. I know I can do all that stuff because I have the cash.
But so that statement alone is causing me to think, but there are studies that say that when those communities receive access to credit, because you said cash in the hand, but why is it that when those communities receive access to credit, the default rate is so high if cash is actually the more precious than, because cash in the hand has value. I can see it. Because how come it doesn't translate when they receive credit?
Because I think you're conflating two issues, which is often the problem with payday lenders and those types of businesses, is that the problem that they're seeking to solve is giving you, access to your own money, right? When the person who's applying for a loan needs more money, they need more income, they need more access to resources, right? And so that's different and apart from the resources you actually have. So I don't think that having a loan it depends on why you need the loan. But having cash and how you handle and treat your cash is going to be a separate issue. So I'd like to bifurcate them if we could. So I don't know if you're following me here.
I'm listening.
I see you listening. I know how you listen, Muriel. I like to bifurcate these issues. I think the first one is, how much cash do you have on hand? And we already know poverty means not a whole lot.
Or none,
right? And you're robbing Peter to pay Paul, or you're moving this over to pay that.
More month than money.
More month than money. I mean, the adage is just, we've
heard them all.
We've heard them all. And so credit enters the scene, right, as an opportunity to give this person, leverage. But the problem is now you got to pay that back with interest. So did you really get a resource, right? That's different than fee for service. Just how do I access my money in the first place? And, that's stats out there that the average person that doesn't have a bank account or doesn't use a bank account as their primary source, they call them unbanked versus underbanked. But people who don't use that in the center of their financial household budget spend about $800 a year trying to access their own money. That's not lost on me. But, when we peel back the layers, is that a poor choice? And I'm not fighting for the limitations of people in precious communities. But what I am trying to fight for is the idea that they can be part of their own rescue, that they have made a legitimate decision. And what we can do a better job of is offering them more choices so that they can make even better choices among the ones that they have.
But in many of these households, even in this day and time, you find generations that are continuing that same behavior. So how are we changing the trajectory? Grandma used a check casher, so I'm going to use, and Mama used a check casher, so I'm going to use a check casher. And where is the learning to change my circumstance?
Well, that's precisely the gap that, a firm like Shahidah Speaks tends to or tries to fill, right? That education and trust gap, right? We don't trust because we don't have the education. And of course, those of us who don't trust sometimes because we do have the education to understand what has happened in Black and brown communities with, in some of our systems and the, institutional racism and so forth. So education, I think, is paramount. Building the capability and the options available to Black and brown communities. Because, I always say in conversations like this, okay, we always talk about the traditional bank versus the big bag check casher, right? Well, and the check casher is clearly more expensive, right? And then the traditional bank, just fee for service. But again, I'm arguing that based on the behavior of the person consuming the product, it may not be cheaper because of how they handle the bank account may end up triggering a bunch of fees. And then the consequence of that at a traditional bank is heavier than bouncing a check at a check casher. If you overdraw your checking account, you may ruin your possibility of having a checking account anyplace else, right? Now your name is on the list, right? Check systems. And now you got credit problems and bank problems where you could have just walked in and for 1 or 2% of your check, cashed this check and went out the door and never had the risk of that happening. And for some people who don't have the financial capability, that's a legitimate argument. But I wanted to add in the conversation the opportunity for a third option that someone should create, maybe us, I don't know. And that is, what if we have a less expensive check cashing service where people could have, and I suppose credit unions fill some of that space, but people need a cheaper option to be able to transmit money. And there are companies like Libra and some of these other firms that are trying to enter that space to figure out fintech, to enter that space to figure out how to help Black and brown communities and people with high school educations or less understand how to discern their bank accounts and discern how to use and transmit money.
Well, it's not just individuals with a less than a high school education, because we're finding that, well, I guess it would be the Gen X's come after the millennials. My goodness, you want to get me in that? Well, I'm trying to figure that out. I'm still trying to, because I still think I'm young forever. But many of the current generation, they're really not using banking products and services.
Right.
And so you have this college-educated generation that doesn't use banking products and services. You have this community of individuals that I would say that have their PhD just from life that are not using banking products and services. One can really afford the difference, and the other, it is the difference of them being able to move out where they are. How can we change? What is our role? Those of us that are on the outside, or you call us the do-gooders. How can we change this? Because we've become a society, we really have, of the 90% that control all of the wealth and the 10% of that are struggling just to be able to make it.
Wow. Yeah, that's intense. I mean, wow, that's a heavy lift of a question. I mean, let's take that a little in bites. First of all, financial technology, or fintech, is entering the marketplace, right? I mean, why do people bank in the first place, right? They need the payment systems, right? They need to transfer money back and forth. They need to save, right? They may need access to credit, right? So people have reasons why they need banking in the first place. But do we need a bank? And the answer seems to be no, right? Then we don't necessarily need a bank. But as those products become more and more sophisticated, right, they also become more challenging to regulate. They become more challenging to manage, and they become more destructive when something goes wrong, right? When something went wrong at the bank, you go down to the bank, right? And albeit it may be challenging to fix that, but at least I know I can talk to a person, I can deal with them, But some of these services, right? I mean, we can name some of them, but we have some in our head. But, once, it's easy to send the money, it's easy to get the credit. But if something goes wrong, there's no person to talk to. And you end up in this big web of, so the stakes are really high to understand what you're consuming and how to consume it. So you're right. Shout out to everybody, because whether or not you have a PhD in philosophy, I imagine that's a sophisticated thing, or and everyone else, it's very challenging to figure out how to consume in the fintech world, because the stakes are really high. These products are really complex, and as kids start to use these products and services on their cell phone, I don't know how we're going to manage, but to increase the level of financial education. But then you asked the second question, right? I think you asked a question about, well, how are Black and brown communities supposed to deal with all of this, right? And again, it comes back, I think, and it sounds like I sound like a broken record, but it comes back to education, and so that you can build the toolkit of the person who's going to consume. And I think that helps combat some of the issues, and I hope it also refines what's available in the marketplace, because as consumers choose better choices, then the worst ones go away, right?
But and education is one of the things that's a pillar for you, and you are a strong advocate. Educate. But I can't help to think about the stories that, I frequently heard in my early 30s and 40s of individuals who were passing away and who were leaving this huge inheritance for a particular college or a university. And more often than not, they never attended a college or university. Their education didn't exceed that of a 6th or 7th grade level, but they were able to figure out how to save and manage their money. Somehow there seems to be a disconnect from what was happening then to what's happening now.
Shout out to my grandfather, who passed last March at the age of 90, who, for all intents and purposes, was functionally illiterate. But he came up from the South, and he taught himself a trade. He was very good with his hands. He's opened his own auto mechanic shop. He saved his money. He bought his houses, cars, right? I remember him writing a tuition check or two for me, right? And he was happy to do it, because that wasn't, he felt like he made it possible for that ground to be fertile for me. And, in honoring his legacy, he had a bank account. He went to the bank every Friday with his check And he talked to the teller, and they knew him by name, and he did all of his business, and him and my grandmother could budget to the penny. And they could, and how did they do it? And I have to say, look, however they did it, the magic of our people, right? They were able to pass that on to me. And I always tell people, like, no matter what college or university I attended, and I've attended several, the best education, the best financial education, the system by which I used to discern what to buy and what is or is not a good idea came from that. It didn't come from a textbook. So that goes back to me kind of calibrating what I think about the word education in the first place. I'm not talking about traditional education. I'm talking about a system of discernment. I'm talking about a system that you can rely on to make choices that make your life different and better.
So would you say that society as it is today, because we learn from the things that are going on around us, entertainment, television, social media.
Sure.
Would you say that that has enhanced our financial acumen, or would you say that it has really eroded our financial acumen?
I think it competes with it. I think marketing is about consumption, right? You know, you've heard me use the quote before that, you know, someone once said in tongue-in-cheek, you know, the marketing and advertising is the art of extracting $1 from a man's pocket without resorting to violence, right? I wanted 3 things listening to the radio on the way here that I didn't even know I wanted, right? So
somebody did a great job.
Somebody else like, oh, I need to go get that. You know, like it's competing, I think, with the principles that I think a lot of us who did get a good financial education. You know, shout out to Grandpa again, right? You know, my desire to have nice shoes, right, is in direct tension with the precept that I understand about saving, living below my means, budgeting, you know, so that I need to admit that up front, right? I'm a human. I admit that, but that's the gauntlet we all run. Now, imagine if I didn't have a good financial education from Grandpa and my parents, you know, shout out to my parents too. But if I didn't have those things, now I'm just kind of out there in the market. There's a new vulnerability, right? That I'm just like, oh, that sounds like a great idea. Oh, that sounds like a great idea. Oh, yeah, I got to have that. And before you know it, you're broke. You're worse off than you were before. But you think because you got an immediate thing that you're better off. And so the sensation is good for the moment. But then after that, and you come back and look at that budget, or you look at the rest of the month, and you're just like, whoa, what happened?
See, what you're basically saying is that the consumer, no matter where they are on the income spectrum, that they're brainwashed.
No, I'm saying that there is noise interfering.
They're brainwashed.
There's noise interfering. You know, you see, remember those old sitcoms where you had the good angel on one shoulder and the devil on the other? Right? There's noise interfering with the angel speaking into your ear. My grandpa, save that money. Don't go out to eat. Red bottom shoes, what's that, right? And then over here, you know, I'm saying, you know what? I need to go to that party with a new dress, right? I need to go out to eat because I deserve it. And I need to try that new restaurant. And all of those things are noble goals if they don't frustrate the budget.
And on the surface,
and they do.
On the surface, I can understand what you're saying on the surface, but I'd have to counter that because, you know, and a shout out and condolences on the loss of your grandfather. And it appears that he had a life well lived. But for those that don't have that grandfather and grandmother or mother and father that understood the power of money so that they could teach it to the next generation and to the next generation, they're struggling to find their way.
Well, that's also why I became a consumer advocate and why I insist on using that language is because I think that's patently unfair. That by the sheer lottery of my birth, I happen to be born to people who got the money thing right. You know, my parents don't have a mortgage. They're independently wealthy, and my grandparents were able to live a good life to make that possible. And then, you know, I graduated from college with no student loan debt. My parents wrote that check. And some from, you know, grandma and grandpa, right? Got to acknowledge that. But I think that's patently unfair that just by the lottery of my existence, I didn't have to have those struggles. And so how do I spread Grandpa's message? How do I spread, Mitchell and Crystal, those are my parents, by the way, Mitchell and Crystal's message, don't spend that, save that, be better stewards of your money. Credit is an option, but not, the primary option. How do I do that? And that's why I started Shahidah Speaks, is because it gives me a platform, it gives me an opportunity to talk about some of these issues. But then also, talk about them with intelligent people. And a lot of times as do-gooders, we don't realize the bias we have, but we sometimes feel that when people don't have access to money or they were born to poverty, that they also don't have discernment. And I think that's wrong. I think that's absolutely wrong. I think there are reasons why people choose the choices that they do, and they're not always stupidity.
I think it's rarely stupidity. I agree with you wholeheartedly there. I've said to individuals many times in those precious communities when they've been made to look down on themselves because the do-gooders have come in and told them all the things that they've done wrong. And I've shared with them that if we place a do-gooder in your community and have them live with you for one day,
they couldn't do it.
They could not do it.
They could not do it. I'm not sure I could do it. I'm not talking from up here. I'm saying, look, I get it. I think, right? I get that poor people spend more money per day than non-poor people, right? I get it that you live further away from the jobs and opportunities, and you have more of a gauntlet to run to get the things that you need done, right? And so some of the choices you make wouldn't be mine, but I'm not living your life. Right?
So as we're coming up on the end of the show, we've analyzed the problem. What is the light for? I'm living that life. There's holes in the floor. I got some other situations going on, and there definitely is never enough money. And I find myself having to compromise my own integrity in order to make it. And I'm coming to you, and I need hope. What are you going to say to me?
Well, the first thing is there is hope. You made it here today. You made it to tune into this station. You made it to sit in front of me. You made it to share your story. So there is hope. There's a reason you went through all of that. And it's so you can change your life. If you desire to change your life. Now, I'm not going to say that's going to be easy or that I have an antidote and all you have to do is take this potion or, file for this tax credit and your life is going to change. Listen, we do-gooders. We can be some of the worst people to come to for help sometimes because we don't understand the person we're trying to help. But I will say that hope, is just in waking up in the morning because it gives you another opportunity to try it again. And so what's the plan? We come up with the plan together. That's of course how I run Shahidah Speaks, is that it's your plan. It's not mine, because after our conversation, after our meeting, after our session, after our workshop, you're left with the plan and you got to execute. Right? And I can help reinforce, I can help, but you're going to have to do it. And so it's about putting the power back with you. And some of that is, again, education, a system, understanding how money works. And some of that is a little bit of discipline, telling them up front, okay, look, this is the work that's going to be required. And some of it is giving an opportunity, because all a lot of people need is an opportunity. And I think a nice cocktail of those three things gives people what they need to pull themselves out. It's not one of those things. I think it's all three of those things. And that's not the work I can do for them. It's what they can do for themselves if given the opportunity.
So you're saying dig deep.
Dig deep. Step out of the way.
I can do this.
Absolutely.
Well, I just love having you at the table.
Well, thanks for having me. I love being in your air, Muriel. It gives me an opportunity. No one else wants to hear this from me sometimes, right?
Well, I think the world is a better place because you do speak.
Well, thank you.
And so how can our listeners, catch up with you, find out where you're going to be, find out what's going on, and actually bring you in to help change what's going on in their atmosphere?
Well, I'm glad you asked. The website's under construction, which is going to be shahidahspeaks.com. But for now, ShahidahSpeaks@gmail is a great way to reach out. Shahidah is spelled SHAHIDAH and then speaks with an S at gmail.com. I'm also under that Twitter handle and that Instagram handle as well. And I'm always sending out quotes of inspiration and so forth. I'll be glad to send you a quote of inspiration and a price list if you're interested in having me talk to you or your youth group, your church group, or just your corporation or what have you. We can certainly get that going for you.
Well, thank you so much for spending some time with me today. I really appreciate it.
Well, thanks for having me.
You've been listening to Champagne and Credit, Pathway to the Middle Class, right here on dcradio.gov at 96.3 HD4. Hey, dig deep. You can change the trajectory of your life. Talk to you tomorrow.
In DC, for DC, DC Radio, 96.3 HD4 and dcradio.gov.